As always, welcome back, fellow scientists. So, we're going to dive right into it. We're going to get through all the rest of the hormones that we need to get through today. Hopefully, you've already taken your quiz. I set it to open up at 11:30, and I think I set it to close at 12:30. So, I think that's basically the whole entire class. It should take you an hour to do that, but it's just kind of frustrating to go back and to open it up for a couple people who missed the deadline by just a few minutes. Anyways, if you haven't done so already, go take your quiz before it closes, and then we have to go through all that gobbledygook again. So if you've already taken your quiz, then go ahead, go on OneNote, find these notes, and fill them out because we're going to have a very similar quiz on Friday. By the way, Friday, the hormones that we learned about on Monday are fair game, and the hormones that we're going to learn about today are fair game also. So just kind of be prepared for that. All right. So we talked about on Monday. We talked about the pineal gland and the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary and all of those hormones. So now we're working inferiorly down the human body. So next we come to the thyroid. Thyroid has three main hormones. We're going to group two of them together, T3 and T4. So these are the metabolic hormones, right? You can just remember them that way. They have many target tissues. Basically, they increase metabolism. They increase protein synthesis because proteins are the workers, they're the enzymes. Our bodies need them to break down food and to get the energy from the food and to build stuff up. They increase fatty acid breakdown. Fatty acids are another source of energy for us, and it accelerates body growth. Calcitonin is another hormone made by the thyroid, and it targets bones specifically, and it is used to lower calcium levels in the blood by making the bones kind of absorb more calcium from the blood. So those are the hormones of the thyroid. Parathyroid, we're just going to talk about one, and that is the parathyroid hormone. That's actually its name. It also targets the bones and it targets the small intestine. So this is kind of an antagonist, right, for calcitonin. So they work against each other, or I guess we could say that they work together to achieve the same goal, to achieve homeostasis, right? If calcium levels are too high, then one of them works. If calcium levels are too low, then the other one works. So parathyroid hormone targets bones and small intestines. It increases the calcium level. So if calcium levels are too low, parathyroid hormone kicks in and it makes the bones break down a little bit. Let's see, makes the bones break down a little bit, or it increases absorption by increases calcium in the blood, or increases absorption of calcium in the digestive system. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because it's in the digestive system, it's in the tube. Remember, you are a donut, right? And so whatever's in your small intestine isn't actually in your body. But if we want to absorb more calcium, if we want more calcium in our blood, then we're absorbing that calcium through the small intestine into the bloodstream if we need more, if we need to increase. Also, similarly, if we need more, we're going to break down bone where the calcium is stored, and that's going to increase our blood calcium levels. I thought I had something written down wrong, or it was mixed up. Funny story. I think I told you this when we were going through the intro. Is that people used to not really regard these glands as kind of separate, but it was just part of the thyroid. And so the thyroid, as we talked about before, makes metabolic hormones, right? And so some people, their thyroid is overactive. It's called hyperthyroidism, and they experience massive, unexpected weight loss, and they're like a rapid, like a heartbeat, and their metabolic rate is just way too high, and it's kind of stressing their body out. So one way to take care of that is to just simply like remove the thyroid. And so surgeons used to do that before they knew about the parathyroid. They just try to like rip the whole thing out. I mean, not rip it out, but they would just take it out. But then these people they would have muscle spasms called tetany, where their muscles were just so like hyperactive and contracting, and it would actually their muscles would spasm so much that they could even break their spine. They would break their back, and then they would die. And so they're like, what in the world is going on? So they investigated further and they tried different techniques, and they found that if they took out most of the thyroid, but then they left just these little patches right here, that tetany, that muscle contraction, those muscle spasms didn't happen. And so then they investigated further, and then they actually named the parathyroid gland as a different gland that's kind of attached to the thyroid. But anyways, kind of an interesting story of humans thinking that we know what we're doing, but then it turns out that we really we really didn't, and harm was caused. So, anyways, those are the hormones of the thyroid and parathyroid. Thymus. This is going to go really quickly. You don't need to memorize these names. Just know that the thymus helps T cells to mature. We already talked about T cells last unit, part of the immune system. Boom, done. Moving on. All right, next is the adrenal glands, which sit right atop your kidneys. All right, so the adrenal cortex, so that's kind of like the outside of the adrenal glands. So adrenal cortex produces aldosterone, which targets the kidneys, so very, very close in proximity, very good for that. So aldosterone increases sodium in the blood and it decreases potassium in the blood. So that's one hormone. Adrenal cortex also produces cortisol. Now, you may have heard of cortisol. It's commonly referred to as the stress hormone. So if you're stressed, then your adrenal cortex is going to produce cortisol. So that increases protein breakdown so that we, so that we can get energy from the protein. It increases glucose formation so that we can, then ship that to our cells and get energy from that. Increases lipid breakdown, right? So that's again getting energy, and then general resistance to stress, so inflammation. So all that stuff that we talked about before, the swelling and the redness and everything like that, and the possibly like resistance to movement of joints, right? We don't want that. That's bad if we're stressed. So we need to kind of suppress that. And then also it suppresses the immune system, which in the short term is a good thing because then we can kind of channel energy elsewhere. But then, of course, in the long term, then that's a bad thing, and that's why being stressed for too long is not very good. Someone should tell the governor about that. That staying home causes stress. And doing online education causes stress. We need to not be stressed, so we need to get out of the house, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm better. So then adrenal medulla. So remember, that's the inside of the adrenal glands, and this is adrenaline. This is classically what you think of. So epinephrine, norepinephrine. By the way, epinephrine, that's what's in an EpiPen. So if someone gets a bee sting and they're allergic to it and their airways start to tighten up and everything like that, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, that stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. Remember, the sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight. So that's going to dilate our pupils. That's going to increase our airways. So if we have an allergic reaction, our airways are tightening, then epinephrine relaxes or increases those airways. It's going to raise our heart rate. We're gonna be ready to run away from that saber-tooth tiger, right? So adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine stimulates sympathetic nervous system. So that's good for the medulla. Moving on, pancreas. We're just going to talk about two enzymes, and these are antagonists, by the way. Or they work together, but they work in opposite directions. So glucagon, if our blood sugar is too low, then our pancreas releases glucagon, which targets the liver. Which the liver is where we store a lot of our sugar products or our sugar molecules in the form of glycogen. So glucagon makes the liver break down glycogen to raise blood glucose levels if our blood glucose is too low. And then oppositely, if our blood glucose is too high, then the pancreas will release insulin, which targets many tissues and which lowers the blood glucose levels by increasing the uptake of glucose in the cells. So if we have too much glucose in our blood, then our cells want to take that in, and it lowers the blood glucose level because then it gets stored in our cells. So those are the only two pancreas hormones that we're going to talk about: glucagon and insulin. All right, so last but not least, we arrive at the gonads. So female gonads are ovaries, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, arise from the same tissue as the male gonads, the testes, right? So the ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen is the classic female hormone. Obviously, they have many target tissues. I showed this to you before, and we're going to talk about it again when we do physiology of the reproductive system. But just really quickly, you may have noticed these numbers kind of down here. This is just based on averages, right? So menstrual cycle could take as short as 21 days. It could take as long as 45 days, right? Actual menstruation, actual bleeding or sloughing off of the endometrium could last anywhere between 2 days. So this is just kind of what's regarded as normal and typical, and almost no one is normal or typical. So yeah, if you had any questions about that. Um, let's see. So it regulates the menstrual cycle. So here we have our estrogen right here, spike in estrogen right before ovulation. And then progesterone, you can see this is kind of a graph of what's happening in the endometrium, right? We're going to learn with reproductive anatomy that there's three layers to the uterus. There's the endometrium, the myometrium, the muscular layer in the middle, and then the perimetrium kind of on the outside, right? And so this is a graph of the endometrium. And so day one of the menstrual cycle is the first day of bleeding, which can last anywhere from 2 to 8 days, right? And then after that, then the endometrium starts to kind of build back up, build back up, build back up. And what it's doing is it's preparing for possible fertilization of this egg after ovulation. If the egg is not fertilized, then progesterone decreases and then the cycle just starts over again. If the egg is fertilized, however, then the endometrium is ready to accept it, ready to nourish it, ready to give that little tiny one-celled life an actual fighting chance at becoming a human being. And so if fertilization does occur and implantation does occur, then that little embryo is going to send out signals and the levels of progesterone are not going to decrease. And that's kind of the decreasing levels of progesterone is kind of the signal to start the cycle over again and to start the sloughing of the endometrium. But if that embryo sends out the signal, progesterone does not decrease and it actually increases a little bit, and it'll maintain the endometrium for the next 9 months. So hopefully a healthy baby's born. So all that to say that estrogen and progesterone regulate the menstrual cycle. Also, we'll talk about this in reproductive physiology, but it regulates the formation of eggs in the ovary. It also, we already talked about this, maintains pregnancy. So maintains pregnancy from the very, very beginning all the way through 9 months or 40 weeks, which doesn't really add up, but we'll talk about that later. And then also, if the female is pregnant, prepares mammary glands for lactation, right? And then last but not least, promotes development and maintenance of secondary sexual characteristics. So secondary sexual characteristics are any characteristics that are not directly involved in reproduction. So changes in voice, changes in body hair, usually widening of the hips, right, are classic female secondary sexual characteristics. All right, and then last but not least, this is the last slide. So the male gonads are known as testes. Just like the ovaries, there's two of them. Testis is the singular for the male gonad, and they basically only make one hormone. They make testosterone. Testosterone, this is interesting, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in depth because this is just so fascinating. But it stimulates the descent of the testes. So I said that the ovaries and the testes, they originate from the same kind of tissue, from the same kind of embryonic tissue. And let me kind of show you this. I forget if I showed you guys this in regular biology. I know I showed you guys, those of you that took AP, I know I showed you this in AP biology, but you may remember from regular biology all the way back when we were talking about meiosis and when we were talking about non-disjunction, and we were talking about Klinefelters and Turners and trisomy X and different things like that, how I said that all babies start out as female, and then if and only if the Y chromosome is present, then they take that sharp right-hand turn towards maleness. And so this is why I say that all babies up till 7 weeks, their genitals look the exact same. It's just one kind of amorphous, just kind of blob of tissue, right? If the Y chromosome is not present, or if something is wrong with the Y chromosome, if there's a mutation, or if there's a mutation in the gene that makes the receptors that will react to the presence of testosterone, if any one of those things kind of goes wrong, and the body, the tissues can't respond to androgens or can't respond to testosterone, then female genitalia will develop. However, if the Y chromosome is present, or if mom is making too much testosterone, this actually happens. If mom is making too much testosterone during pregnancy, something's kind of gone wonky with hormones. It's not really going to affect her too much, but it's definitely going to affect the baby who's developing and like the course of its life is being set in some instances. If mom makes too much, or if the Y chromosome is present, and excuse me, androgens are present, then male genitalia will develop. So testes, ovaries, same tissue. Scrotum, labia majora, same tissue. Shaft and labia minora, right, same tissue. And then glands and clitoris, same tissue, right? So all that to say, that's why one of the jobs of testosterone is to stimulate the descent of the testes. We'll talk about this in reproductive physiology, but the testes need a certain temperature for sperm to develop properly, and so the scrotum is in charge of maintaining that temperature. Now, it's really interesting, right? So descent of the testes, these have to descend through the pelvic floor. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of inguinal hernias, right? But a hernia is basically like a rip or a tear in the abdominal muscles or in the muscle wall. And so this pelvic floor right here, where the testes have descended through, that's a little bit weaker, right? And so if you've ever heard of an inguinal hernia, you've probably heard of males getting inguinal hernias. Some females do, but mostly it's males who get inguinal hernias because the pelvic floor is just a little bit weaker there because of this physiology that happened. And so what happens is, in extreme effort, or trying to lift something really really heavy, then the abdominal muscles will squeeze so hard, and then this is a weak spot right here, and they'll actually push the small intestine through that weak spot and make an opening and make a hole, and there will be some small intestine that kind of pokes through down there into the scrotum and causes discomfort and pain and pressure and just not good things. So I find that absolutely fascinating, and just wanted to kind of share that with you. If you've heard of that, then maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. Or if you experience that later in life, then maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. All right, last but not least, testosterone also regulates the production of sperm. So we start with our spermatogonium, right, out here kind of in the outer reaches of the tube, and then it goes through the process of meiosis 1 and then meiosis 2, and then the sperm are in this tube, and then the tube go all the way up. And we'll talk about that with reproductive anatomy and physiology, but testosterone helps to do that. And then just like estrogen and progesterone in females, testosterone also promotes the development and maintenance of the male secondary sexual characteristics. So again, that's voice and body hair. Males usually are broader in the shoulders, whereas females are usually broader in the hips. I'm not trying to be sexist or making any rash generalizations, but it's generally true, right? God made females, the female body, in preparation for childbirth, and God made the male body in preparation to work the ground and to toil and labor, and to die early. Right? Statistics show that males usually die before females. So again, I'm not trying to be sexist, but I do see, and I want you guys to see the beauty as well, that God's word, God made them male and female. He made them different, right? Different roles, different, separate but equal, right? Different roles. His word is expressed in biology, in anatomy and physiology, in the way that we develop, and in our bodies that God has given us, and it is just absolutely beautiful, right? Now, that's not to say that females can't go out and have a job and be the breadwinner. Like that's totally fine. That's not to say that males can't have caretaking jobs, like being an elementary school teacher, or being a nurse, right? I've probably told you guys this before, but I always threaten my wife Rachel, who's a nurse, and I really like what she does, and it's amazing, and I would like to do that too. I always threaten her, if this whole teaching thing doesn't work out, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to become a nurse. And she's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But yeah, anyways, so all that to say, that concludes our discussion of hormones. Friday, we're going to talk about feedback loops. It's going to be a really short lecture. It's just going to be one slide. I'm just going to give you one example of a typical feedback loop and then how feedback loops go wrong. So look forward to that. Make sure that you're studying for the quiz that we're going to have on Friday. It's going to be on all the hormones that we talked about, both on Monday and today. And I think that's all that I wanted to say. So thanks so much for watching. I hope it's been informative and entertaining. And I will see you on the flip side.